Okay, I am Michael Pearl. We're here at the door, and we are going to share some history with you. Now, this is my story. Truly, my interest, if I could tell the story without me being part of it, I would, because the story is a whole lot bigger than my experience, but it's something I experienced in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in particular. And it's an era I wish I could take you back and let you just for one evening touch and feel the things that we did back in that time. We lived through the Jesus movement. We saw thousands of people come to know Christ. We spent time on the streets and the parks, even in their night spots. They called them coffee houses back then, where they would sit and play their music or lay on the floor and listen to the music. And I've been in their homes, their houses, where they all shacked up and clothes were optional. I always wore mine. And so we saw many of them come to Christ. We did a lot of street preaching. And many of those people I've been in contact with. And I'd like to have some kind of forum where different ones could write in and tell about their experience during that time. But the story begins back in 1945 when my daddy came home from war early, married my mother, and I am the firstborn child. Now, my daddy was of Jewish descent, but a heathen who drank, cussed, and fought. One of 8 boys that came out of Alabama. Father died when he was about 12. He was the second to the youngest. And the mother raised, I think, 12 or 13 of them altogether. And so they came up in a Depression era when survival was difficult. Several of my uncles during my youth committed suicide or died from various acts of violence. One of them was blown up building the bridge over the Mississippi River. And so I came from a poor family, I guess. My daddy was a house painter, and he never did make a whole lot of money. Sometimes we didn't have much. My first recollections of life, the earliest ones, I was about 4 or 5 years old, and we had moved to a 14-acre piece of land my daddy bought, along with several of my uncles and aunts, all bought in that area down South Memphis, down below the airport. And we built a little one-room house about 14 feet wide and 20 feet long, uninsulated. You can see the boards on the outside, tar paper on the outside. And that's what we lived in. Had a wood-burning stove, kerosene lanterns. We had to walk to a neighbor's about a quarter mile away to get water in a bucket, or we'd catch rainwater. And we had one little pot-bellied stove that we cooked on and used to heat the house. Truly, I woke up one morning with snow in my bed where the wind blew it and it came in through the eave, and there was just a little powder all over my bed. I remember coming home from church one night, and the stove smoked real bad, so my daddy went around behind the house to try to get the pipe off to get it cleared out, and he slipped off the icy ladder and fell into a tub full of ice water, and he was soaking wet, and the chimney stopped up, and there was no place to go. That's kind of the way I was raised. So when I was about 5 years old, there was a preacher came to the Baptist church about a mile away, fresh new Baptist church. The preacher was Percy Ray. Now, some of you old-timers will know him. But he was a preaching windmill out of Mississippi, Myrtle, Mississippi. And Percy Ray came and preached a revival meeting. Well, about half of my kinfolks got born again that week. In fact, most of the community did or claimed to have. And so that started that church off in a real powerful way. So I remember sitting on the church bench, a hot, sweaty preacher preaching, breeze blowing through, and I'd usually end up asleep at 5, 6 years old. But I heard about Jesus from that time on. My daddy went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Thursday, went to all the business meetings, and was active. I can remember him sitting by the dresser with a glass mirror there and had a kerosene lantern to reflect the light. He'd sit there and read his Bible. He walked about 5 miles down to Oakville, Tennessee, and bought a Bible story book, an old brown Bible store book. I can still remember the cover and the little drawings about that tall, little ink drawings on each page, about 2 or 3 pages for each story. And he would read that. He and Mama would read that to me every night for years until I got big enough I could read it myself at about 17. And they wore that thing out. I still had it when I was a young man. Cover was all off of it, and it was falling apart, but I don't know whatever happened to it. But they told me about Jesus, and I knew from an early age I was going to hell. I did. Nothing scared me worse than a preacher, because the preachers would come around, they'd want to pray, and I didn't want to pray. I didn't want to talk about God. I don't know why I was scared. And so we moved away from there when I was about 12 years old, ended up in another church called, don't remember the name of it, but Howard Vickers, I remember, was the pastor. And there I heard about Jesus again and again. And one night when I was 13 years old, about 7/14 in October, I just turned 13, I decided I'd fought and resisted God long enough. So I said yes to the Lord Jesus Christ, and he came in and born me again and saved me. I couldn't stop crying that night. I was still crying when I got home later. I was thrilled to be saved, and it was just an exciting thing to be born into God's family and to be his. And so the next week I was baptized, and that began my journey. Now, I immediately took an interest in sharing the gospel with the people in school, and so I began to try to talk to one or the other. And I was known as a Christian in high school. When I got on up into 14, 15, 16 years old, I witnessed to everybody. I wasn't unusual. If you were a Christian, that's what you did. I witnessed to everybody in the school. I gave out gospel tracts. I remember when I was about 16, I was called into the principal's office. And he said, he had this whole bunch of gospel tracts on the desk. I hadn't seen some of those in a year or two. He said, have you seen these before? I said, yeah, that's good one there. He said, did you give these out? And I said, well, I could have. He said, you can't give them out on the school property anymore. Already starting that kind of thing back then. And this was probably about 1959, 60, somewhere along there, 1960 probably. And I said, well, what if somebody asks me? What if we're talking? Someone asks me, can I give it to them then? He said, well, if they ask you, you can't. So I walked out of the office, and they said, what do you want? And I said, I can't tell you, it's a secret, but I have something here he doesn't want you to read. Said, what is it? I said, you want one? Yeah. And I handed it out. I gave out a lot of gospel tracts that day. And so I said, well, what about most of the kids collected on the other side of the street where the store was in the morning for about 30, 45 minutes before going in to the class. So I said, across the street, that's all. He said, yeah, you can go across there. So I stood across there and gave out gospel tracts every morning. So everybody knew that I was the one that was going to give them a gospel tract. They would listen. Now, by then, we had joined a church, a different place, moved on. We lived to 14 different places during my first 14 years. When you can't pay the rent, they run you out, so you have to go somewhere else and rent a place. And we bought a couple places and couldn't afford it and sold them. And so we were moving up a little bit each time. So now we lived in a very decent house, had a flushing toilet and everything, had a washing machine and a bedroom, 3 bedrooms, and there was 4 of us kids by then. And so we went to a place called Fairlawn Baptist Church. Bobby C. Moore was the pastor. And he was a young fellow, about 30 years old, I guess, and loved the Lord and could preach the Bible. And so what happened at this point is not owing to anyone. It was a movement of God that I couldn't duplicate it today. No one else could. And I didn't cause it, have anything to do with it back then, but it was a movement of God that we were a part of. And that's the kind of thing I want you to see and feel what happened. But then it was about 1960, about 1960, 61, and we'd heard of beatniks back in the 50s. Beatniks had a little goatee, sat around playing their guitar, and looked kind of spaced out all the time. But this was a new breed. These were called hippies. I didn't even know what hippie was for a long time. But you'd see these hippies in these Volkswagen vans all painted up with their own style letters. And they'd all be dressed, the women in real long dresses. And their hair was always long and straight. And they always carried guitars around with them. And you'd see them sitting around in groups playing music today that would be considered too mild for church, a folk music. And they sang about love and a life. And it was just a gentle, peaceful-looking group of people, mostly because they were all so high and strung out on acid that they didn't have any motivation. But they would gather in groups and do the thing they did, which was quite often immoral. But about 1960, 61, somewhere along there, revival started taking place in the church. We would go to camp meetings, Christian camp meetings, and everybody got saved every year. The singing and the praying and the preaching, meetings would last 3 or 4 hours. It was fun. I mean, hilariously fun. I remember going out on the street before a camp meeting and meeting a couple guys walking by. And I said, come to go to camp, I'll pay your way, like $53 for a week of food and camp and everything. And so I was working with my daddy painting houses and had the money. So I paid these 2 guys way to camp. And they went and heard the gospel. So many others had invited sinners to come to camp for a week. And there we would have preaching and praying all day long. We loved preaching and singing, lots of singing for an hour, for 2 hours. The band back then, mostly just somebody good on the piano playing, and we would sing. And so the youth group there, when I was about 15 years old, got involved in the youth group in the church. Actually, just kind of sprung up spontaneously. We had what was called a Friday night Bible study, we called it. But we would get together, about 60, 70 of us crammed into a house, and there was no formal way of doing anything. We would just sing for about an hour, and then anybody that wanted to could give a testimony, and everybody tried to at one time. And anybody that wanted to could preach a little bit, and so it usually lasted about 3 hours. And we didn't figure we'd have a good meeting if the thing didn't end with somebody getting saved and everybody crying and laughing. So it was just totally different from anything you experience today. That youth group would go out on the streets and give out gospel tracts. We would just go from door to door and give out gospel tracts. We witnessed to everybody that we met all the time. Now, we weren't that unusual. That was the way Christians were back then, at least the ones that I knew around there in Memphis, Tennessee. And so it was a blessed time, a time that Christians were maybe a little naive. The media didn't come against Christians like it does today. The sexiest thing on TV was Lawrence Welk. Seriously. And you didn't have the anti-Christian propaganda in the schools. When I was in the 8th grade, I can remember they would have preachers come to the church, come to the school, and hold their revival meetings and offer invitations for you to get saved. That was in the public school, Oakville School. Now, I was driving by that about a couple of years ago with some people, and we were coming up to it, and I said, now look up here on the right. I said, this is where I went to school the first 8 years. And so they all started looking. I said, it's coming up, it's coming up, coming. And I pointed, and there it was, and a big sign in front of it says, Oakville Mental Health Institution. It wasn't a school any longer. I said, no, that it was something different. It was Oakville. And so that little school right there they had prayer before class, had Bible reading before class, and it was closer to a Christian school than the Christian schools are today. People were respectful. Kids never spoke up. They didn't talk in class. Class was quiet. I got paddled with the Board of Education several times, about this long, about ½ inch thick and about 3 inches wide. They'd bend you over an oak desk, and the teacher could gauge how effective it was by how far the desk scooted. So I learned to knee it like this, make it scoot a little faster every time he'd hit you a lick. So, it hurt. You learn to not run in the hallway and to listen when the teacher said be quiet. So it was a totally different time. That was the time when they would have nuclear drills, nuclear bomb drills. Everybody jump down, get under the desk. I learned later that's not going to do you much good. I guess that's so you can find your body. Look under the wood. And it was also in my youth, I forgot to mention, I lived about 3 miles from the airport during the Korean War. And many a time, and I say many, my little mind back then, I was 6 and 7 years old then. I saw on several occasions at least, we'd be sitting there and I'd hear pop, 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 pew, pew, and then it'd stop. And so we'd go run and look outside, and here'd be this plane going over, one engine on fire, going down, parachute. So we'd go out in the woods and try to find it. There'd always be big piles of metal, lots of wire. I don't know, so much wire in those things. And then we would hear planes going over. We'd look out and we'd see 50 planes in a line, and each one of them dropped out about 25 people parachuting. So the whole sky was full of all these parachutes coming down like that. That was real common because they were training and preparing for the Korean War. And the jet engines was new, and we'd hear them had a big testing place where they'd test those jet engines. 3 miles away, you couldn't talk when they cranked those things up. Big concrete building, they had them strapped down in. And often we'd drive by the airport, and there'd be a skid mark and crossing. You see a plane buried in the mud on the other side, or one crashed on the runway. They took those old planes and just used them until they came out of the sky, and that's the way they trained back then, different from today. So that's the era in which I was brought up. So the next time I'm going to take it from there and tell you a little bit about Jesus.